It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Beware of fakers. Odds are the Jones or the Lowes are likely broke.
You know, this was one of the ones, and the whole show was just absolutely monumental in terms of blowing your mind. But this was the one that I thought was so amazing, is the perception that the Jeff Lowe was able to give off to everyone around him that he was this successful mogul, had all these resources, when it turns out that probably wasn't the case.
Well, I couldn't figure out, because I've watched even episode 8. And here's what I can't figure out, Bo, for all the people who are watching this. I keep wanting to say Lion King because I'm such a Disney fan, but it's Tiger King.
Very different than the Lion King.
Very different.
Do not make that mistake with your young kids.
So in this thing, you see that you totally had Joe Exotic fell prey to. He was really the sizzle, the dazzle that Jeff had, because he shows up with Ferraris. He takes Joe out to a big mansion, and then you find out he leased all this stuff. I mean, he had leased the Ferrari. He didn't get the security deposit back because, by the way, you're putting big cats like tigers. I can't imagine that's good on Italian
that's on
leather.
the leather.
So, and then you got this big leased, mansion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out with an indoor pool, and I'm like, of a person who's had rental property before, you don't typically just willy-nilly let people, but they never in the show told you what Jeff did for a living. But it did show, it sounded like as we went deeper, maybe his depth of financial ability was not as strong as initially anticipated. Sure. He was more all hat, no cattle, but did he look fancy. And I think that's the part, and by the way, that is the majority of Americans.
I was going to say, perhaps it's not Jeff Lowe that's like trickling into your life, but perhaps there is that neighbor who's right down the street that just bought the new car, or put the pool in, or has the nice clothes, or builds the bigger house, or whatever the case may be. They very well may be doing that, and that may be okay, but I think sadly, the truth is a lot of folks in that world are kind of faking it.
So think about it. The average American, we've done this stat every year, and it stays pretty consistent. Around 60% of Americans can come up with $1,000. And you're actually
terrifying.
Coming through this pandemic, when you see the huge wait lines at they're not soup kitchens, but the family, where the food banks.
Food banks, yep.
They've had a lot of trouble where people are struggling to pay bills. I mean, that's why, thank goodness, we have the CARES Act that's starting to push money out. Today, I think, is the day I've even heard some of our coworkers have gotten the checks rebates today. So that's a good thing. But it is still scary how lean the average American's running it. So when you're comparing yourself and you're trying to figure out how do the Joneses keep doing it, because you're trying to keep up with the Lowes, the Joneses, here's what you need to understand. They might be receiving, and if they're not using debt and credit cards to fake success, they might also be getting help from their parents, because there's a lot of research that shows that 75% of parents help their adult children out financially.
Yeah, and frankly, we say this all the time, Brian, it's hard to keep up with family money, and a lot of times if you try to, you're just going to set yourself up for failure.
And then I thought this is something I've used in a previous show, is that the majority of people are just living for today, and you can see this in this stat right here, is 68% of adults, young people, expect inheritances, yet only 40% are going to receive them. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. You might be thinking that mom and dad are going to leave you something, but there's a good chance you might need to start planning for yourself. So pay attention to that stuff.
But here's the fact of the matter. You cannot control what the Joneses do. All you can control is what you do. So what are some of the tips that you should take away to make sure that you don't fall prey? Well, if you've listened to the show for any period of time, you know that we think that housing costs should be less than 25% of your income. So whether you're renting or have a mortgage, you want to make sure your housing costs stay under 25%. Your cars, if you're going to finance an automobile, you have to make sure it's paid off in 3 years. Follow the 23-8 rule.
Yeah, and all that means is you're going to put down at least 20% on the car. You're going to pay it off within 3 years. Go to a 3-year amortization. You're going to ensure that your total car payments, and I'm not talking about every car gets this rule. I'm talking about each car. You total up all the cars you have. I don't want car debt to exceed more than 8% of your income. That's 23.8. And here's one caveat that we should have put an asterisk on. If it's a luxury brand, it's 12 months, same as cash. This 23.8 only applies to normal brands. I want you, like if you're buying a Honda, a Toyota, you're just trying to make sure you have dependable transportation for your family. That's fine. As soon as you start buying luxury brands, it needs to be 12 months, same as cash. And then, of course, there was a period where I felt like we did every episode, we had a slide on this, but it is so worth repeating because you see how much trouble the average American has. you've got to pay off your credit cards monthly.
You have to. It is one of the single most detrimental things. We talk about how powerful compounding interest and 88 times over can be. Debt, specifically consumer debt on credit cards, works in the exact opposite direction. And generally speaking, it works a whole lot faster than compounding interest on the growth side.
So Tony here. Tony is a predator. I mean, there is no doubt he's a predator. Think of your credit card as the same way. You do not want to be the prey, because anytime you get to debt that has double digit, I'm talking about close to 20% interest rates, you are nothing more than the prey that is being fed to dangerous Tony here. So pay attention to that stuff.
Did you just come up with that on the fly?
What's Tony the Tiger?
I love
Frosted Flakes.
He's great.